In December 2004, a device emerged that would forever alter the landscape of portable gaming. With the PS1 and PS2 absolutely obliterating the home console market, it wasn't a question of if Sony was going to make a handheld, it was a question of when.
Its name is UMD, Universal Media Disc.
It's PSP for me right now, real quick.
Wait, this is mine?
No, it's mine.
It's going to be a new baby within the family. Sony Computer Entertainment will be launching new handheld entertainment platform in 2004.
They didn't even make a massive spectacle out of it at first. Sony president and CEO Ken Kutaragi, the father of PlayStation, casually announced the development of the new portable device, leaving gaming journalists scrambling to pick their jaws up off the floor. You have to understand the era. In 2004, the hottest piece of tech was a flip phone, and we were playing Snake on Nokia bricks. Portable gaming meant squinting at a tiny low-resolution square on a Game Boy. Then Sony rolls up with the PSP, and it didn't look like a cheap plastic toy. This wasn't just a console your parents bought you for a long road trip. This was a legitimate status symbol. Pulling a PSP out of your pocket in the middle school cafeteria was the mid-2000s equivalent of walking in with a Rolex. Kutaragi unveiled that the device would run on a brand new miniature optical format called the UMD. At less than half the size of a standard CD or DVD, these tiny discs could hold a massive 1.8 gigabytes of data. This was Sony attempting to monopolize your entire digital diet. It meant the PSP wouldn't just play massive 3D games with lighting and textures that rivaled home consoles. It was going to support MPEG-4 codecs, giving you literal DVD quality movies right in the palm of your hand. Why buy an iPod when the PSP could hold your music? Why buy a portable DVD player when the PSP could play Spider-Man 2? Before we actually got our hands on the console, Sony dropped some early concept images that had the entire gaming community sweating. Seriously, if you look at these early renders, they looked like an ergonomic nightmare designed by someone who had never actually held a controller in their life. All the iconic PlayStation face buttons were completely flat and perfectly flush with the surface of the system. Imagine trying to play a high-stakes fighting game on a touch-sensitive microwave panel. There was absolutely zero sign of an analog stick. The only normal thing about this cursed prototype was the back, which featured the UMD drive door and that iconic silver chrome ring. Thankfully, those were just concepts, because when E3 2004 finally rolled around, Sony brought out the big guns and absolutely leveled the venue. Sony president and CEO Kaz Hirai took the stage with pure corporate swagger to officially debut the PSP, and the final product they unveiled was absolutely tantalizing. It was sleek, it was dangerously compact, and it was dripping in that glossy with fingerprint magnet piano black finish. At the time, E3 was heavily focused on investors, retailers, and convincing Wall Street that gaming was the future. Kaz made it crystal clear exactly who Sony was hunting with this device. They weren't trying to sell colorful Pokemon cartridges to kids on the playground. Nintendo already had a total monopoly on that. No, the target demographic was people aged 18 to 35 with disposable income. Kaz doubled down on this aggressive corporate strategy by casually mentioning a massive ecosystem of PSP peripherals. We are talking GPS modules, attachable cameras, extended batteries, and many more. But even with all the multimedia hype, the Hollywood synergy, and the fancy hardware, Kaz knew what actually moved the needle. He made it very clear that games were the PSP's absolute killer app. To prove that this wasn't just some gimmick, he dropped a massive, mind-melting sizzle reel showing the world that PlayStation's heaviest hitters that felt impossible to run on a handheld were finally coming to your pocket. Let's talk about the actual hardware, because holding a PSP in 2004 felt like you had somehow stolen a piece of alien technology. The entire front of the console was dominated by a massive, stunning 4.3-inch LCD screen. We are talking about a 480 by 272 resolution with 24-bit color, which was great during that time. The PSP didn't just outperform the competition, it represented an absolute quantum leap in portable display tech. It was the first time mobile gaming felt truly premium, treating your eyes to a level of cinematic brightness that made everything else on the market look like prehistoric garbage. The control layout paid direct homage to its big brothers in the living room. You had the iconic PlayStation face buttons, triangle, circle, cross and square on the right, a classic D-pad on the left, and two clear shoulder buttons crowning the top. But the real game changer sat right below the D-pad, the innovative analog nub. It gave you precise 3D movement that was literally unavailable anywhere else in the handheld market at the time. Under the hood, Sony's engineering team was basically performing dark magic to completely smash the limitations of mobile hardware. This beast was running on two 333 MHz processors working in tandem, backed by a dedicated 166 MHz graphics processing unit. In 2004, that was unprecedented firepower for a device that could fit in a jacket pocket. The system initially shipped with 32 MB of main RAM and 4 MB of embedded DRAM, split between the GPU and the media engine. Sony was pushing the silicon to its absolute limit, so much so that later slim models eventually had to double the main RAM to 64 MB just to keep up with increasingly demanding game libraries. Of course, packing that much raw, unadulterated power into a portable frame came with a massive structural catch. To juice this powerhouse, Sony packed in an 1800 mAh battery, promising anywhere between 3 to 6 hours of gameplay. But let's be entirely real here. If you were rendering a full 3D open world with the screen brightness cranked to maximum, you were living much closer to that 3-hour mark, desperately hunting for a wall outlet. And please hit that subscribe and like button to support the channel, because I desperately need to enable ad revenue to either fix my busted old PSP or finally buy a PS Vita.
Welcome, Grandpa, to the brightest.
Japan got their hands on this technological witchcraft first, with the PSP officially dropping on December 12, 2004. And honestly, the initial pricing was surprisingly aggressive. The base model set you back 19,800 yen, which is roughly $181 today. If you wanted to flex with the higher tier value system configuration, it launched at 24,800 yen, or about 226 bucks. The Japanese launch was an absolute smash hit, moving over 200,000 units on the very first day alone, proving the tremendous anticipation around Sony's handheld debut was completely justified. North American gamers, however, were left sweating until March 24, 2005, and when it finally crossed the Pacific, Sony got a little greedy. They released the PSP in a single configuration for $249 in the United States. Despite the massive shock, the North American launch achieved remarkable success, with Sony reporting 500,000 units sold in just the first 48 hours. But the absolute wildest part of this rollout, when the PSP finally hit PAL territories, it went completely supernova, smashing even Sony's most wildly optimistic projections. In the United Kingdom alone, the console sold over 185,000 units, with every single piece of stock evaporating from store shelves within 3 hours of launch.
Come out and play! I can't! I'm playing Nut! But there's Portable Nut! What? Yeah! It's a nut you can play with outside!
PSP. It's like a nut you can play with outside.
When the PSP finally dropped, it wasn't just another handheld trying to grab a slice of the market. It was an apex predator. For the first time in gaming history, the established market leaders had a legitimate reason to sweat. Industry analysts immediately crowned the PSP as the first real threat to the entire handheld status quo, and they were dead right. This thing could connect to your PlayStation 2, your upcoming PS3, any computer with a USB port, other PSP systems for local multiplayer, and straight to the internet. These connectivity options blew the doors wide open for gaming, media consumption, and social interaction. It wasn't just a gaming device, it was a truly modern entertainment hub. And the developers? They were absolutely salivating. Sony aggressively flexed a list of 99 developers backing the system before it even hit store shelves. The early demos and launch lineup made one thing crystal clear. This was a pocket-sized powerhouse. Out of the gate, you had the hypnotic, stylish beats of Luminous, the street racing adrenaline of Need for Speed Underground rivals, and absolute heavy hitters like Metal Gear Acid and Wipeout Pure, which proved on day one that this hardware could hang with the big boys at home. At the very top of the food chain, absolute undisputed bangers. Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories emerged as the highest-selling PSP game of all time, moving a colossal 7.5 million copies.
Homelander speaking.
But here is the thing that people forget. The PSP wasn't just for gaming. It was a full-on, undeniable media machine. You could load up your music, watch full-length movies, and even read digital comics thanks to Sony locking down massive partnerships with companies like Marvel, Disney, and IDW. And then there was the built-in web browser. Sure, it's nothing fancy by today's standards, but in the mid-2000s, surfing the actual internet on a handheld device felt like you had hacked into the future. Sony also started predicting the future of the entire gaming industry with remote play. This mind-blowing feature let you connect your PSP to your PS3 from anywhere with a Wi-Fi connection. You could stream your music, watch videos, browse photos, and literally power your home console on and off remotely. It was leagues ahead of its time, giving players the very first taste of what true portable to console integration could look like. And the absolute wildest flex? Starting with software version 3.90, certain PSP models got full Skype support. That's right, you could make literal voice calls over Wi-Fi, essentially turning your PSP into a high-powered pocket-sized communicator years before smartphones took over the world.
Little kid lover. That way people...
But we can't talk about the legacy of the PSP without addressing the absolute corporate madness that powered it, the UMD drive. How do you fit PS2 level games onto a handheld in 2004? Cartridges were too expensive and normal DVDs were way too big. So Sony invented the universal media disc, trapping a tiny optical disc inside a plastic shell. Let me tell you, playing a massive 3D game off a physical spinning disc inside a handheld console was a completely chaotic experience. You could literally feel the gyroscopic pull in your hands as the disc spun up. It sounded like a miniature jet engine preparing for takeoff on your fingers, and it absolutely devoured whatever battery life you had left. And the loading times? Hideous. You'd boot up Midnight Club 3 and have enough time to go make a sandwich, eat it, and contemplate your life choices before the race even started. Then there were the UMD movies. Sony tried to sell full-length films on these things. Imagine paying $20 to watch a heavily compressed version of Spider-Man 2 on a 4-inch screen on a proprietary disc format that literally only worked on one single device in the history of the universe. If the UMD was a wild experiment, the storage solution was straight-up highway robbery. Instead of using standard SD cards, which were already becoming the global norm, Sony forced you to buy their proprietary Memory Stick Pro Duo. This is classic Sony corporate greed. They artificially inflated the price of saving your game. A 1GB memory stick could cost you up to $100 back in the day. You weren't just buying a console, you were paying a Sony exclusive hidden tax just to be allowed to save your Vice City Stories progress. They built a beautiful digital ecosystem and then locked it behind a VIP paywall that punished their most loyal players. Sony wasn't content with just releasing one version of this hardware and walking away. Over its 10-year lifespan, the PSP physically mutated multiple times as Sony tried to perfect the formula. First you had the OG model, the PSP 1000, affectionately known as the Fat model. This thing was built like a luxury tank. It was heavy, premium, and durable. But in 2007, Sony put the console on a strict diet and dropped the PSP 2000, also known as the Slim and Light. They shaved off a massive amount of weight, added a video out port so you could actually hook it up to your TV, and most importantly, they doubled the internal RAM to 64 megabytes. This was an absolute godsend for cutting down those brutal UMD load times, and the homebrew hacking community absolutely loved the extra memory. Just a year later in 2008, we got the PSP 3000. Sony upgraded it with a wildly vibrant, punchy new screen to make those colors pop. Even if hardcore purists complained about some minor interlacing scan lines, they also threw in a built-in microphone, which is what made that crazy Skype calling feature actually usable without needing a bulky headset. Then in 2009, Sony decided to innovate, and they accidentally predicted the future about half a decade too early. Enter the PSP Go. It was tiny, it had a slick sliding screen that looked like a futuristic smartphone, and most importantly, it completely ripped out the UMD drive. It was an all-digital console with 16 gigabytes of internal flash storage. Today, an all-digital console is the industry standard, but in 2009, it was an absolute disaster. Internet speeds were terrible. Physical game stores like GameStop refused to stock it because they couldn't sell used games for it, and the pricing was a joke. And finally, in 2011, we got the PSP Street, officially known as the E1000. This was the budget, end-of-life zombie model. Sony stripped out the Wi-Fi entirely, slapped a matte plastic finish finish on it, and downgraded the audio to a single mono speaker. It was a cheap final cash grab designed to squeeze the very last drops of blood out of the market before the PS Vita arrived to meet its own tragic fate. Whether it was the shrieking UMD drive, the massive game library, or that thumb-destroying analog nub, the PSP is an undisputed icon of gaming history. Look, we all praise the Steam Deck today for putting a full PC in our hands. And yeah, Valve's hardware is incredible. But if we are having a real conversation about absolute era-defining dominance, the PSP wins hands down. The Steam Deck is basically just a heavy gaming laptop compressed into a handheld. But in 2004, the PSP was doing the impossible. It was pulling high-fidelity, living room console graphics and putting them right in your jacket pocket while everyone else was still squinting at 2D sprites on a Game Boy Advance. It wasn't just good, it was dangerously, stupidly powerful for its time. If you made it to the end of this deep dive, you're an absolute legend. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss these video drops. Drop a like and let me know in the comments, what was the absolute best PSP game of all time? And if you had to choose between a peak era PSP or a brand new Steam Deck, which one are you taking?